Hey, everybody, welcome. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Should be yet another great late night conversation. Should be good. So let's do it. Let's do it.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just it's a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. So glad that you're here tonight. We're going to have yet another one of our great late night conversations. Now, the way this works, for those of you who may not be familiar with our show, first, I give my opening remarks, and that's what I've prepared to talk about. Whatever it is that I'm planning to talk about tonight, that is what I will talk about in my opening remarks. Then after that, we do the roll call, where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. We find out who is on the other side of the camera. Always a great experience. And then from there, I answer your questions for the rest of the night. So if there's something you would like me to talk about in the second half of our program, the best thing to do is to send me a Rumble rant on Rumble or a super chat here on YouTube. Either one works, and that's how I can see what your question is and I can answer it. I know we're streaming live right now on Rumble. We are streaming live right now on YouTube, and we are also on Facebook. However, I cannot see a question that you ask on Facebook. So if you want to ask a question, you need to send it on Rumble or you need to send it on YouTube. Now, those are the best ways to reach me. So I really do appreciate you all being here. Before we get started, just an announcement. I really would encourage you to listen every morning to the morning messages on the Center for Political Innovation YouTube channel. Every single morning, we have messages, and they're good. They're great messages from members and friends and allies of our group. I did one that went up this morning. We had one from a new person on Sunday. We had one from Rachel on Saturday. And it's just a great thing that we do. I think you deserve to have the best day possible. And part of the way to do that is to enable you to start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism. Start your day with an optimistic message, learn something, share an insight, etc. And so this is the Center for Political Innovation YouTube channel. I would encourage you to become a subscriber to that YouTube channel and tune in, because every morning at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the morning message for the day premieres. And we try to have one every single day. And it's a great way to start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism on the CPI YouTube channel, which then brings me, because it is difficult to have a message every day, not an easy thing to do, have a message every single day. I would encourage you to make a morning message. We've had a number of different members who make morning messages that we can share with our community. And we have this great link that Peter Coffin created where you can make a morning message. So if you like what we do here on this YouTube channel, if you like what we have to offer, by all means, submit a morning message of your own. You can read from one of our books. You can tell a story. You can read something. You can give us a piece of wisdom. You can tell us about the TV show you watched last night. You can tell us about a conversation you just had with your brother-in-law, or whatever it is you want to talk about, right? And we try to have community members learn to take care of each other, learn to give each other that care and that boost to start the day. Start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism on the Center for Political Innovation YouTube channel. That is the way we do it. Go subscribe to that channel. And if you feel inspired, go and submit a morning message so that you can share what we have here and become part of the process of helping us lift each other up and build a network of anti-imperialists here in the center of the global imperialist financial system. So thank you very much for all that you do. Tune into the morning messages. Great way to start the day. So on that note, folks, I will be beginning my opening remarks for tonight. And as always, the way this stream works is first I give my opening remarks. Then from there, we do a roll call. And then the rest of the show is me answering your questions. So if you've got a question you would like me to answer in the second half of our show, send a super chat, send a Rumble rant, send in your questions, get me talking. That's what I would like you to do. So thanks for being here, everybody. Also, hey, just want to throw this out there. Don't know if this makes a difference or not, but I'm trying to experiment with ways to get around internet censorship and all of that. Tweet this out. Tweet this out. If you have a Twitter page, do me a favor. Take the link, the URL of this stream, whether it's on Rumble or YouTube. Tweet this out. Let's see what happens. Who knows? Tweet this out. Let's see if it works or not. I don't know if it'll work. And again, we're not trying to win the internet. We're just trying to build our community. But, that's just an experiment. But anyhow, folks, it is September. It's starting to be fall here in New York City. I'm in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. And of course, tonight we're talking about our favorite person in the whole universe, Miss Kamala Harris. Sarcasm, of course. Kamala Harris is somebody I have been raising the alarm about for decades. I'm sorry. I've been raising the alarm about for 4 years. 4 years ago, I wrote a book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts. And that book that I wrote, it got reviewed in the Morning Star, the Marxist publication of Britain. And then it also got reviewed in a couple newspapers in India, and it sold a few hundred copies, 595 to be exact, and I didn't really think much of it. And I thought there might be an uptick in sales after it became clear that Kamala would be the nominee. But then the very day that Kamala Harris became the nominee of the Democrat Party, Amazon removed the book. And for 7 days, Amazon would not allow me to put the book back up. Yes, we are live, Carter. Wouldn't allow me to put the book back up for 7 days. It wasn't until the following Monday they allowed me to put the book back up. Big deal. And the fact that they would pull a 4-year-old book about Kamala Harris on the day that she gets the nomination, just out of concern that people might read it, that made the book explode. And since that day, 3,000 copies of that book have sold. I have gone on InfoWars and Jimmy Dore and Kim Iverson, and Gray Zone has talked about me, and my book on Kamala Harris, exposing who she is and getting not just into her record as a vicious prosecutor and overall dishonest person, but also into the psychology of Kamala Harris and how it is that she gives herself license to harm other people and be indifferent to the harm she is inflicting on other people. My book, getting into the psychology of Kamala Harris and how dangerous she is pretty widely circulated now, getting a lot of attention. We also handed out 1,000 copies at the Democrat National Convention in Chicago, thanks to our team who worked very hard to do it. And yeah, it's pretty wild. Now, Tonight, I wanted to talk to you all about Kamala Harris in a way that I haven't talked about her before. But before we do that, I'm just going to show you the video that I made to show you the Kamala Harris that I know. This is the Kamala Harris that I started researching 5 years ago. This is the Kamala Harris that was the Attorney General of California and the District Attorney of the Bay Area, who destroyed the lives of thousands of people and took pleasure in doing so, who's indifferent to other people's suffering, who feels that she needs to get revenge on the world. This is the Kamala Harris that I know. The Trump campaign can't quite make up their mind about what she is, and that's fine. They're Trump, right? Trump is Trump, and conservatives are conservatives. But we here know who Kamala Harris really is. This is who Kamala Harris really is, and this is why she shouldn't be president.
That with the swipe of my pen, I could charge someone with the lowest level offense.
She put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana.
So I learned at a very young age the power.
So I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy.
The power.
Well, this was a little controversial in San Francisco. And frankly, my staff went bananas. They were very concerned because we didn't know at the time whether I was going to have an opponent in my reelection.
And because of the swipe of my pen, that person could be arrested. They could sit in jail for at least 48 hours. The power.
She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor.
As a prosecutor and law enforcement, I have a huge stick.
The power. Power. They could lose time from work and their family maybe lose their job. They'd have to come out of their own pocket to help hire a lawyer. They'd lose standing in their community. All because of the swipe of my pen.
Usually the job comes with a badge.
The power.
And there is often an artistic rendering of said badge on your stationery. And I have a huge stick.
The power. The power. Weeks later, I could dismiss the charges, but their life would forever be changed.
And I have a huge stick.
So I learned at a very young age the power.
Held up the letter, said if you don't go to school, Kamala's going to put you and me in jail.
The power.
Yes, we achieved intended effect.
The power. Weeks later, I could dismiss the charges, but their life would forever be changed.
And I have a huge stick.
When you were in a position to make a difference and an impact in these people's lives, you did not. And worse yet, in the case of those who were on death row, innocent people, you actually blocked evidence from being revealed that would have freed them until you were forced to do so. There is no excuse for that. And the people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology.
Yeah, that's Kamala Harris. And that's not exactly what the Trump campaign is saying. The Trump campaign, sometimes they're calling her a communist. Sometimes they're calling her soft on crime. We're not the Trump campaign. We are the honest people who know who she is. And we are anti-imperialists, and we know how dangerous Kamala Harris is. And furthermore, we know why that is. And I actually have a message for you all tonight. But before I get to that message, there's a couple other things about Kamala Harris that we should also reveal. So I just showed you how she's a vicious prosecutor. She destroyed the lives of working people. She, with her truancy law, etc. Kamala Harris is quite dangerous. But let's also talk not just about her willingness to harm other people, her lack of a moral compass. Let's also talk about her beliefs about free speech, or her lack thereof.
He has lost his privileges and it should be taken down. And the bottom line is that you can't say that you have one rule for Facebook and you have a different rule for Twitter. the same rule has to apply, which is that there has to be a responsibility that is placed on these social media sites to understand their power. They are directly speaking to millions and millions of people without any level of oversight or regulation, and that has to stop.
So let's take apart what she just said here, right? Like, she was saying that Trump should be banned from social media outlets, but let's take this apart.
He has lost his privileges, and it should be taken down. And the bottom line is that you can't say that you have one rule for Facebook and you have a different rule for Twitter.
Actually, yes, you can, because they're both private corporations. So, yes, Twitter and Facebook have different policies and different owners, different terms of service. So, yes, they can, unless she is admitting that Twitter and Facebook are both more or less wings of the American government. And if that's the case, we should have total free speech on them. Now, that's an interesting slip of the tongue there. You can't say you have different rules for Twitter and Facebook. Why not? Right? I mean, why can't we have different rules at McDonald's? Why can't we have different rules at Burger King? Why can't we have different rules for Pepsi and different rules for Coke? She's almost admitting, not almost, I mean, she's blatantly admitting there that Twitter and Facebook, the huge tech monopolies that reap billions of dollars in profit, are almost de facto wings of the American imperialist government. And if that is the case, we should have total free speech on them. Right? You have free speech in the public square. You don't have free speech at Burger King. You don't have free speech at Walmart, but you have free speech in the public square. And if Facebook and Twitter are part of the public square, I should be able to say whatever the hell I want on Facebook and Twitter because they're part of the public square. When she's saying they can't have different rules, yes, they can, unless they're part of the public square. And we know that they both have partnerships with the FBI and with the intelligence agencies. And we also know that they've gone as far as trying to shut down competitors with them, like TikTok. And so, yes, the tech monopolies and the social media giants are a wing of the imperialist government. And as a result, our right to freedom of speech should exist on them, because anything that is government belongs to all of us, not just to private owners, in theory. So let's continue with what she says here.
He has lost his privileges, and it should be taken down. And the bottom line is that you can't say that you have one rule for Facebook and you have a different rule for Twitter. The same rule has to apply, which is that there has to be a responsibility that is placed on these social media sites to understand their power.
To understand their power. These social media sites should understand their power. What does that mean? That these tech monopolies have a job to guide public opinion, have a job to tell us what to believe, have a job to direct our thoughts and our ideas. This is scary stuff, folks, what she's saying here.
They are directly speaking to millions and millions of people without any level of oversight or regulation. And that has to stop.
There's some people who've looked at this clip and said she would ban X, formerly known as Twitter, if she became president, because to some degree or other, Elon Musk has pushed back and tried to play by his own rules. This is all very, very, very concerning. But it points to something deeper, and I'll get to the point in a little bit. I promise I will get to the point here in a little bit, but I want to also show you an actual Kamala Harris ad. This is not a sarcastic ad made by opponents of Kamala Harris. This is an actual advertisement for Kamala Harris's campaign. This, if you are at all anti-imperialist, anti-war, you should not vote for Kamala Harris, because she put out an ad basically saying where she stands.
2016, Donald Trump said he would choose only the best people to work in his White House. Now those people have a warning for America. Trump is not fit to be president again. Here's his vice president.
Anyone who puts himself over the Constitution should never be president of the United States.
It should come as no surprise that I will not be endorsing Donald Trump this year.
His defense secretary.
Do you think Trump can be trusted with the nation's secrets ever again?
No. I mean, it's just irresponsible action that places our service members at risk, places our nation's security at risk.
His national security advisor.
Donald Trump will cause a lot of damage. The only thing he cares about is Donald Trump.
And the nation's highest-ranking military officer.
We don't take an oath to a king or a queen or to a tyrant or a dictator. And we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator.
Take it from the people who knew him best. Donald Trump is a danger to our troops and our democracy. We can't let him lead our country again.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
Folks, let me decode this ad for you, because this is a great ad. I appreciate the honesty in this ad. Let me decode this ad. Let's go through it bit by bit.
In 2016, Donald Trump said he would choose only the best people to work in his White House. Now those people have a warning for America. Trump is not fit to be president again.
All of these are the people who pushed Trump to do bad things, mind you, when he was president.
Here's his vice president.
Anyone who puts
Mike Pence, huge supporter of Israel, ultra-Zionist, obsessively hateful towards Iran, obsessively hawkish and anti-Russian, is saying, don't vote for Donald Trump.
Here's his vice president.
Anyone who puts himself over the Constitution should never be president of the United States.
It should come as no surprise that I will not be endorsing Donald Trump this year.
Yes, his ultra-Zionist, ultra-hawkish, pro-war, anti-China, obsessive, mainstream evangelical Christian militarist war hawk vice president said not to vote for him. The guy who was cheering the loudest and pushed Donald Trump to murder Qasem Soleimani and take us to the brink of war with Iran, the guy who pushed Donald Trump to bomb Syria, he says Trump should never be president again.
His defense secretary.
Do you think...
Again, the Secretary of Defense under Donald Trump, who was absolutely awful, is a longtime war hawk, an anti-Russia fanatic, anti-China fanatic, worked to undermine Donald Trump on the Korea talks. He says not to vote for Donald Trump.
Trump can be trusted with the nation's secrets ever again?
No. I mean, it's just irresponsible action that places our service members at risk, places our nation's security at risk.
His national security.
John Bolton, who threatened to throw Nicolas Maduro in Guantanamo Bay, who bragged about organizing a coup to overthrow the Venezuelan government. John Bolton, one of the engineers of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. John Bolton, a NATO, anti-Russia, anti-China, anti-Iran fanatic, says not to vote for Trump.
Security advisor.
Donald Trump will cause a lot of damage. The only thing he cares about is Donald Trump.
And the nation's high.
Check this one out. The head of the Pentagon, the top Pentagon military industrial complex commander.
Highest-ranking military officer.
we don't take an oath to a king or a queen or to a tyrant or a dictator. And we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator.
Take it from the people who knew him best. Donald Trump is a danger to our troops and our democracy. We can't let him lead our country again.
All of those people are people that we should not want to be voting for the person they support. All the war hawks, all the ultra-Zionists, the head of the Pentagon himself, John Bolton, the most noted and visible regime change neoconservative, who's obsessively opposed to Venezuela because his brain is stuck in the 80s and he thinks he's fighting communism and the Soviet Union still. All of those people hate Donald Trump. I love Donald Trump. That sounds like a real endorsement of Donald Trump. But I want to talk about another thing that was said here, because this is actually part of why Donald Trump is the lesser of two evils in this election. Listen to this part.
As National Security Advisor.
Donald Trump will cause a lot of damage. The only thing he cares about is Donald Trump.
Now, let's roll that back. Let's put that on the screen. The only thing he cares about is Donald Trump. Exactly. He doesn't care about maintaining the dominance of Bank of America and Wall Street. He cares about being remembered as a good president. He doesn't care about defeating Russia and rolling back Russia's influence and waging a proxy war in Ukraine. He cares about being remembered as a good president. He doesn't care about following all the scripts that have been made for him by the ultra-monopolistic corporations. He cares about being remembered as a good president. Donald Trump is an egomaniac. Donald Trump is a narcissist, and it is his narcissism and his desire to be remembered as a guy who did good things in the world that is our best hope right now. There's something called healthy narcissism. If you don't have narcissism, if you don't have an ego, you don't hold yourself to high standards. And this is where it all gets very, very tricky. Donald Trump, why did Donald Trump do this? Right? The best moment of Trump's presidency. I've told you all a million times what it was, but let's put it on the screen again, right? It is the best moment, and if Trump wins, or when Trump wins, we need to get this image everywhere. But let me just pull up the best moment of Trump's presidency. I'm going to put it on the screen for you all. Let's talk about why this happened, right? We're mainly talking about Kamala here, but we'll talk about Trump for a couple minutes here. Why did this happen? How did this happen? This is literally on North Korean territory. Trump crossed the 38th parallel. He became the first sitting U.S. president to ever enter North Korea. Why did this happen? Well, it happened because Donald Trump was a young man when Richard Nixon was president. And it's very clear that Richard Nixon was Donald Trump's hero. Donald Trump wants to be Richard Nixon. Donald Trump talks about the silent majority. That's a Nixon talking point. Donald Trump, he talks about the law being the law and order candidate. That's a Nixon quote. Donald Trump even hired Roger Stone, who was a personal friend of Richard Nixon and got his start in the Nixon White House. Donald Trump wants to be Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon is his hero, and he was a young man when Nixon was president, and he looks up to Richard Nixon. And what did Richard Nixon do? Richard Nixon went to China and met with Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, and started the ball rolling toward establishing diplomatic relations with China. And that picture of Nixon shaking hands with Mao went down in history. And Donald Trump has wanted to be president his whole life, and his hero as a young man was Richard Nixon, and he wanted to go to Asia and shake hands with a communist leader. That's part of it. Part of it is that's who Donald Trump wants to be. He models himself on Richard Nixon, the law and order candidate, the silent majority, etc. But it's not just that. It's not just that. Also, Donald Trump wants to make money. He wants to make a lot of money. And right now in the Russian Far East, in Vladivostok, there's an economic explosion happening, partially because of global warming. There's areas in Russia that they used to not be able to grow food, that they can grow food now. And there's crops growing. The Russian agricultural sector is exploding. Plus, China has got their Belt and Road Initiative, and you got the Eurasian Economic Union of Russia, the Russian Far East explosion. You got China's Belt and Road Initiative. There's a huge economic boom happening in that corner of the world. But there's a giant gaping hole in that economic boom called North Korea. North Korea is completely cut off from the global economy because they quit the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and acquired nuclear weapons. And the only way that this gap, this giant hole in the booming economy of the Far East, where all these parts of Russia, the Far East, and China, and Mongolia, and all, the only way that gaping hole can be fixed is if North Korea gives up its nuclear weapons and the sanctions on North Korea are lifted, and North Korea is able to start trading. They have a railroad they've already built from South Korea that goes into North Korea, and from there would go into Russia and China and all the way over to Europe. But they can't use it because you can't trade with North Korea. And there's a huge amount of wealth to be made, and Donald Trump wants some of that wealth. And so does Jim Rogers, who was a big backer of his trip to North Korea. And I could talk about the whole North Korea angle. Donald Trump is being selfish by doing this. He has an ego. He wants to be Nixon. He thinks that there's more money to be made for him and his pals in the Russian Far East and in on the Korean Peninsula, etc. Good. Good. Donald Trump being selfish, Donald Trump only caring about Donald Trump is good. Donald Trump is selfish in the sense that he wants to make money, but he's also selfish in the fact that he wants to be thought of as a great leader. He wants to be thought of as a man who made peace, not a man who started wars. He wants to be known as a great person, and he thinks of himself in his mind as a great person. That's an important thing about Donald Trump. Donald Trump thinks Donald Trump is awesome. Donald Trump thinks that Donald Trump is amazing and that he wants to show the world how amazing he is, and he wants to do great things, so he goes down in history as an amazing person. That's not necessarily all bad. It's bad if he's indifferent to other people. It's bad if he doesn't acknowledge any mistakes he makes, or he puts other people down, but it's a good thing. And it is the opposite of Kamala Harris. Folks, Kamala Harris is plastic. Kamala Harris is completely plastic. What does it mean when we say that someone's plastic, right? Hillary Clinton came across as very plastic. When we say plastic, what do we mean? Are they literally made out of petroleum? No. Plastic means that there's nothing authentic there. I don't know if you've noticed this, but Donald Trump has been doing interview after interview, podcast after podcast, talking about his older brother and his brother's struggle with alcoholism, talking about, Ultimate Fighting Championships and UFC and how he likes that, talking about all kinds of things. And Donald Trump has been doing these podcasts, and he sits down and he talks to these podcasters for hours. Donald Trump's a real person. He has real feelings, and those feelings are not always good. On Israel and Palestine, they're not great. On the question of free markets and deregulation, they're not great. But Donald Trump has real feelings. His chat with Elon Musk that went viral. I mean, Donald Trump is a real person. Whereas Kamala Harris is not. That's why she's done only one interview. And that interview is so bad. So bad, that interview. Such an awful, awful interview. Just so horrible. Just so horrible. Because there's nothing there. There's nothing there with Kamala Harris. But this is what gets me to what I really wanted to say tonight. Because I don't campaign for anybody. It's no secret that I don't like Kamala Harris. It's no secret that I think Trump is the lesser of two evils. He may do a lot of bad things as president, but he's better than Kamala Harris. But I'm not here to campaign for anybody. I'm here to tell you something, which is your creativity is the most precious thing you have. Let me repeat that. Your creativity is the most precious thing that you have. Your ability to take the world as it is and improve upon it. Your ability to express your feelings and your ideas through art. Your ability to solve problems. That is the most precious thing that you have. That's what makes you human. And that's what gives you the ability to be hopeful. And that's what gives you a moral compass. And if your creativity is suppressed, or if your creativity doesn't exist, you become a very dangerous, vindictive person. How is it that Kamala Harris was able to prosecute the parents of low-income families, children who were truant from school, throw a single mom into handcuffs because her disabled child missed a few days of school? How is it that Kamala Harris can do that with no morals? How is it that Kevin Cooper can be hours away from getting the death penalty? And the governor of California wants DNA evidence to see if they're actually guilty of the crime, and Kamala tries to block the DNA evidence from being acquired. How is it she's able to do that? How is it that Kamala Harris can argue people need to remain locked in jail so that their labor can be used to make money? The cheap labor can save money for the state of California. How is it that Kamala Harris can do these things? It's because Kamala Harris has no creativity. There's a reason she's not sitting down with Elon Musk to talk for 3 hours about stuff, because she wouldn't have anything to say. There's a reason that she's not doing interviews about her life and her family and talking, and showing a human side, because she wouldn't have anything to say. Kamala Harris is manufactured. Everything that comes out of her mouth was written by someone else, was put before a committee and determined and put up against polling data, and everything about her is inauthentic and fake. And when it really gets down to it, Kamala Harris is not that different than anybody else who works and performs a function in a very demeaning job, right? I worked in fast food. I worked as a maintenance worker. And a lot of the service sector jobs, they don't want you to think. They don't want you to ask questions. They don't want you to think. And you just do what the boss says. And as you do it, you become more and more bitter. If you have a suggestion, they're not going to listen to you. If you have a suggestion about something on the job, they don't want to hear it. Shut up, do the job. You get more and more disrespected. And you become bitter. And your creativity is suppressed. And you become more and more bitter. And this is something happening in our culture widely. Is we're not teaching young people to be creative. We're teaching young people to be button pushers. And at the same time that we do that, we're cultivating a bitterness. A bitterness. If you don't think tomorrow is going to be better than today, if you don't think that things in your life are going to improve, if you're not asked to be creative and you're not learning to be creative and you're not taking anything in the world and improving it, what is there to look forward to? What is there to be happy about? And where does your ego come from? All right? You need an ego. You need an ego. Let me repeat, you need an ego. You need to love yourself. You need to be proud of yourself. You need to feel like you are important, like you're making a difference in people's lives. And if you hate yourself, and if you don't feel like you can make a difference, and you don't feel like you have any importance, you just feel like a functionary, what develops is bitterness. Just a lot of bitterness. And what does bitterness ultimately result in? It comes out in the form of aggression, taking pleasure in other people's suffering, lashing out at people angrily. Right? And that Kamala Harris is a great example of that. She's not being creative in any conceivable way. She's not using her position to help anyone or change anything. She is manufactured from the time she was young, through the schools she went through the manufactured plastic politician funnel that they put them through. There's nothing human about Kamala. Everything she says is completely plastic. She has lost her creative ability, and she has no ego. Kamala Harris hates herself. Let me just tell you this. Kamala Harris hates herself. You listen to her talk, she hates herself. Read what her staffers wrote about how she tears them down, the rage that she lashes out at them with. There's no creativity in Kamala Harris. There's no originality. There's no personality there. There's a robotic ability to answer questions, and there is resentment. Huge resentment. That little girl was me. The world was unfair to me. Everyone's got to know. And the only way that the only outlet she has for any personality that's left inside of her is this vengefulness that she develops in hurting other people. That's it. Right? I mean, why was she giggling in that clip talking about jailing parents for truancy? Because that was something she thought of. Very little of what Kamala does is anything she thought of. But she thought of jailing parents for truancy. I wouldn't be anywhere if it wasn't for my education. And that was one thing she thought of in her manufactured fake job as an actress. One thing she thought of is, I wouldn't be anywhere with my education, so I can punish parents whose kids don't go to school. That was the one thing that she thought of. The only outlet she has for any personality is vengefulness, rage, resentment. You don't want to be Kamala Harris. And I'm telling you that at risk of offending you, but you don't want to be Kamala Harris. Look, I went to a couple AOC town hall meetings a couple years ago. And one thing I noticed is that AOC markets herself, right? She's in the Bronx in New York City, and she markets herself to parents from minority communities. And she says, I am your daughter who's not white, your son who's not white. They could grow up to be in Congress like me. I'm a great role model, right? And your daughter, your son, they can look up to me. And so that's how special I am. I'm a role model for your young daughter, your young person of color that you're raising. And I want to be sensitive to that. And that was an argument some people made for voting for Barack Obama. They said, imagine what it means to every black child to know that they could potentially be the president. You know, I don't want to be insensitive to that. I really, really don't. But at the same time, Kamala Harris is more than her race, and she's more than her gender. Kamala Harris is a plastic, manufactured, bitter, resentful, uncreative person. There's not a creative bone in her body. There's no personality left there, except for the resentment. The resentment and the insecurity that drives her to have to make herself more important. It's almost like a dog chasing its tail. All right? Kamala Harris is Vice President of the United States. Kamala Harris is the Democrat candidate for president. But she's still not happy. Why isn't she happy? I mean, think about it, right? I mean, how much more high achieving can you be? You're almost president of the United States. You're the nominee of a major party. You're the vice president of the United States. She should be proud of herself, confident, happy with who she is, but she's not. She put Tulsi Gabbard on the terrorism watch list. Remember that? She was so upset about me, who wrote a tiny little book that only sold a few hundred copies, that she called up Amazon and told them to ban my book. I mean, we don't know exactly what happened. She degrades and tears down her staffers in the vice presidential office and berates them and yells at them. And I mean, she's just nasty. Why is Kamala Harris so unhappy? Why is she so unhappy? She's unhappy because she hates herself. And she's hoping that this, being this great, important, powerful leader will bring her some fulfillment. But it won't. Because there's nothing there. There's no creativity. She's not making the world a better place with her actions. Not at all. She can't point at anything and say, I made a difference. I made things better. No, she can say, I punished those parents who didn't get their kids to school. Well, I made people afraid. I put them in jail. Great. Oh, there was some, people smoking weed in California and I threw them in jail. I got to be the powerful woman who threw those weed smoking people in jail. Oh, great. Do you feel good? Oh, that Kevin Cooper, I almost got to fry a bastard. I almost got to kill Kevin Cooper. Oh, okay. That's great. There's no creative fulfillment in Kamala Harris. She doesn't make anything. She doesn't improve things. She doesn't solve problems. She follows the rules. She follows the instructions. She obeys other people. She colors inside the lines. She reads from the script, and every so often she gets to hurt somebody. Like Tulsi Gabbard, or me, or Kevin Cooper, or low-income parents, or Donald Trump. Every so often she gets to hurt somebody. That's Kamala Harris's existence. She's convinced if she can just be more important, she can just get the spotlight on herself more, that she will not hate herself anymore. But it ain't going to work because there's nothing in her to love. There's nothing in her to bring her fulfillment. There's no creativity. There's nothing, I mean, you think about everything that people do, right? Kamala's not going to get fulfillment from reading a speech before Congress because it's not her speech. And she doesn't have strong feelings about any of the content of the speech. She's just going through the motions. She's not going to get fulfillment from some law that she passes that improves things because she's only going to pass the laws that her staff come up with that say that it's, But she's convinced if I can just rise higher, then I won't hate myself anymore. But she will because all she's capable of doing is coloring inside the lines, following the rules, and pursuing more power. And the only real fulfillment that she can get, the only time that her genuine, actual feelings come out, the only time is when she gets to hurt somebody else. That's the only time we see the real Kamala Harris. The only time we see the real Kamala Harris is when she gets vengeful, when she hurts someone else. Look, your creativity is the most important thing you have. Donald Trump, despite all of his flaws and all of that, he wants to create something. And he has an ego. And in fact, Donald Trump's drive to create, his name is on the side of buildings. And Donald Trump has an ego, and that's why they find him so frustrating, because he's not just coloring inside the lines. Donald Trump is thinking, how is Donald Trump going to be remembered? Donald Trump is thinking, how will I go down in history? Donald Trump cares about Donald Trump. Kamala Harris doesn't care about Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris just knows she's really, really angry. Kamala Harris just knows she's really, really bitter. And Kamala Harris also has been vetted because she's really, really good at following the rules and taking instruction. I've told the story a million times on here, but I'll tell it again. I hated college. I really was not happy in college. I found it very unfulfilling. And when I was in college, I used to joke among my friends in college, so-and-so is so dumb they got straight A's. Because it seemed like the most conforming, non-creative, uninteresting to talk to people were always the ones who got the best grades because they were the best at just copying what they were told. And then years later, I worked as a United Nations correspondent. I had an office in the press corps, and I went to the United Nations every day. And I was in the press building with the people from ABC and CBS and NBC and Fox. These people that had the UN position for all these major TV networks, I would talk to them. And these were supposed to be the smartest people in America. They had gone to Harvard. They had gone to Yale. They had gone to Stanford. These were supposed to be the smartest people in America. And I talked to them. And they were dumb as a box of rocks. They had no idea that there were two sides to the Syrian war. They had no idea that there were two sides to the Euromaidan coup in Ukraine. And then I understood it. They're so dumb, they got straight A's. They're way dumber than the people who got straight A's at my little business school, my little rinky-dink college in Ohio. No, these are people that got straight A's at Yale. These are the people that got straight A's at Harvard. They're that dumb. Meaning that they are so conforming and so non-creative and so lacking in any innovation and so lacking in any of the creative ego that drives people to do good things. When I was in college, I would get very frustrated because I would care about what I was learning. I was studying political science. I would raise my hand and ask questions about topics And there was always one or two people in the class who would just get angry at me for asking questions or making comments. And they would say, is that going to be on the test? Is that going to be on the test? Because they didn't really care about the subject. They just wanted to get the grade. They didn't care. I cared. Why do I care? Because I have, at least on some level, a healthy dose of narcissism. I care about the topic because I want to be on the side of right and oppose the side of wrong. And I look at the injustices in the world and I'm outraged. And I want to see myself as somebody who does something to oppose them. That requires an ego. That requires some narcissism. You have to love yourself in order to try to see yourself on the side of right. You have to love yourself in order to hold yourself to the standard of being on the right side of history. You have to love yourself to challenge what you're being told, to think outside the box, to become interested in topics on your own. You have to love yourself. And if you don't love yourself, you just want to get your sticker. You just want to get your sticker on the paper. You just want to get the A+. You just want to be vice president because you want to be vice president, right? You just want to be the most special person. You just want to get a medal pinned on you. You want to get all the laurels, but you don't have a creative drive. You don't care. You don't really care about the difference that you make in the world. You just want some kind of validation from having the institutions of society say you're approved. You don't really care. And the only outlet for any real emotions that you have is harming other people. Every so often you get to hurt somebody. You're going to be a very, very unhappy person. But you will be the kind of person that goes very, very far in our low-wage, degrowth, pessimistic economy. That's the kind of person they want. They want somebody who colors inside the lines, who memorizes the vocabulary words, gets an A+ on the test, never has an original idea, never has an original thought, and never tries to solve a problem, and never challenges anything, and only every so often lets their feelings come out to punish or harm some nonconformist. Right? And that is the case, right? It's the other end. Right? It is the other end of narcissism, right? A lack of curiosity, a lack of interest. Lack of curiosity is a good way to put it. A lack of interest, an indifference to the world around you, just a desire to get laurels or stickers, a desire to make the people in charge pat you on the head and say, good job. It is a very awful place to be. Kamala Harris is driven by her insecurity, and she's driven by her resentment and her anger and her bitterness, and she has been transformed almost into a piece of machinery. Kamala Harris is not the ruling class that owns the means of production. Kamala Harris is a functionary. She's an appendage to their machine. She's alienated, just like any worker is alienated. And she's a victim of this very system that is alienating all of us. And this is a danger in our time because I see this a lot with people my age or younger, is that through their jobs and through their life circumstances, they get trapped in this mindset Don't be interested in anything. Don't ask too many questions. Don't solve problems. Just be a functionary, and every so often let that aggression come out. Right? That seems to be the Amazon personality. That's the Walmart personality. You know, years ago, I went to work at Kmart. I applied for a job at Kmart, and I thought I would just, you know, fill out a job application or turn over my resume, but I ended up having to take a 60-minute, like a 600 question. It was a big long test, a big long psychological profile that I took. You know, that's what you do if you work at Kmart. And they didn't call me back. They didn't call me back because I didn't have the kind of personality that they were looking for. They were looking for some other type of personality. I'm telling you that creativity is essential to happiness. Creativity is essential to happiness. And, you know, the ultra monopolies. Yeah, Gabby's been there. The ultra monopolies that dominate our world, that are transforming our world into a high-tech dark ages, a low-wage police state, that are pushing degrowth and automation. They very much don't want creative people. Small business owners, on the other hand, they are very creative. Small business owners, right? They're all about, you have to have new ideas and all of that. But the ultra monopolies that dominate the US economy, the Silicon Valley tech giants, the retail giants and manufacturers, the huge chain, you know, big box stores and you know, fast food and all of that, they want you to be just like Kamala Harris. They want you to be a bitter functionary. They want you to check off the right boxes, color in the line, and only be yourself by letting the rage that develops by being dehumanized come out every so often. You know, I could tell a number of stories here. I could come at this from different angles. Maybe tonight is not the night for that. But I got to tell you that you don't want to be Kamala Harris. Right? If you run for president, you should be doing what Donald Trump is doing. You should be on every podcast, letting your big personality come out, telling personal or funny stories, connecting with people. You should, if you run for president, you should be creative. People should know you as someone who has thought of new things to improve their lives. Look, you need to nurture your creativity. If you don't want to be miserable like Kamala Harris, if you don't want to be vengeful and pessimistic and resentful and jealous and childish and insecure like Kamala Harris, you need to nurture your creativity. And it can be very hard to do when society is set up to make you into an alienated appendage of a machine, to make you into a drone, to degrade you, to program your mind with stupid social media. It can be very, very hard to nurture your creativity. That's what you need to do, and that's what I should probably help you do. I'm realizing this is a journey of learning for me as well as you, right? We're on a journey together. You watch, this is stream number 790 some. You know, if you watch stream number 1 and you watch stream 700, you'll see that we've come a long way. We've been doing this for quite some time. We are learning together. we're on a journey of learning together. And learning requires being interested, requires being invested, it requires wanting to improve yourself. And nurturing creativity and having positive interactions with other people where you play off of each other's creativity, where you brainstorm, where you interact with each other to develop something new, that is part of the beauty of what it means to be really human. And we have a dehumanizing world, a world of alienated labor. Go and read the philosophical manuscripts of Karl Marx, where he talks about workers being reduced to an appendage of a machine. All right? When Marx talks about alienated labor, the concept that he's talking about is he's talking about how a basket weaver who makes the whole basket himself puts a little bit of his soul into each and every basket that he weaves. But if you make baskets in an assembly line and that worker clocks in and he does one little change and the baskets get churned out at the end of the assembly line, it doesn't have the same kind of spiritual fulfillment. Right? This Marxist concept of alienated labor it has a psychological impact. It leads to a bitterness. It leads to a pessimism. At the same time that you're becoming more alienated and bitter and pessimistic, the society around us is ruled by an ultra-monopolistic group of bankers and corporations that have a pessimistic worldview. Growth must stop so that they can stay at the top of the world. China and Russia and Venezuela and Iran have to be beaten down so they can stay at the top of the world. There's just too many people, and they're breeding too much, and they're having too many children, and we've got to get rid of the useless eaters. We've got to replace human beings with machines. We've got to roll back consumption. Talk about fascism and degrowth. They have a pessimistic worldview, and they want to mold you into a piece of their machine and roll you away from the creativity and the drive to expand and innovate that really defines you as a human being. That's Kamala Harris. That is Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is just as much of a miserable part of their machine as every person working in that Amazon warehouse. And people at that Amazon warehouse who are being degraded and mistreated by their employer, they're organizing. And they're asserting their humanity. They're demanding that their union be recognized. And they're pushing back against the dehumanization and the social engineering that this ultra monopoly of Jeff Bezos is trying to impose. There's many, many layers to this. But if you read my book and you read about what really drives Kamala Harris, the rage she feels at her father, the victimhood and the bitterness that she has towards the world, if you read about who Kamala Harris really is, which my book shows you who she really is, look, they wouldn't have banned it if it didn't hit hard. You'll learn that you don't want to be Kamala Harris. And that what is giving Donald Trump the upper hand right now, which, I mean, I'm not saying Trump is great. I mean, Trump was not a great president in a lot of ways, his first term. But what's giving you the upper hand what's giving Trump the upper hand is that Trump has got a healthy dose of narcissism. Trump wants to be remembered by history as someone who does good things. Trump wants to see himself as someone who improved things around him. And even though Trump's value system and even though Trump's worldview is so contrary, Trump is trying to assert that human need to create. Whereas Kamala Harris has none of that. Kamala Harris is just an alienated piece of their gigantic political imperialist degrowth war machine. Kamala Harris is just a cog in their evil machine. And she's bitter and she's resentful and she's going to be more miserable. She can be president of the United States and she'll still be miserable. Because she's lost her soul. That is my analysis. And that's what I wanted to say about Kamala Harris for tonight. So on that note, folks, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us here tonight? Names and locations. Lawrence Johnson is in Chicago. Welcome, Lawrence. Welcome. Shanti in Mexico. Welcome, Shanti. Hosen in Iran, Alex in Brazil, Courtney in Northern Virginia, Carolyn and Dario in Brooklyn, Dana in Indiana, Ryan in Kansas City, Batch in Arizona, Gabby in Chicago, St. David's, Bermuda, Rice from Adelaide, Australia, Anthony in Detroit, Carter in Minnesota, and Bella in California. All right. And Carter, I will be streaming after the debate tomorrow night. Johnny in Cincinnati, Joe in North Carolina, Tony in Tasmania, Mariah in North Carolina, Megan in Canada, Luca in Singapore, Chad in Spokane, Washington, April and Chris in Salt Lake City, Gregory in Toronto, Scott in Maryland, John McCarthy in Chicago, Brendan in Colorado, Carolina in Berlin. Welcome. Anybody else? Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us here tonight? Anybody else? Names and locations. I've got 3 super chats to answer so far. If you want to send more questions, that'll make the second half of the show grand. Grand, by all means. Names and locations. Carter, I'm Caleb in New York City. Not you. Gala in Austin, Texas. Welcome, Gala. Rachel in Winder, Georgia. Welcome, Rachel. Good to have you with us. Welcome. I am. Anybody else? Names and locations. Marcos in Venezuela. Welcome, Marcos. Good to have you with us. All right. Bob in Troy, New York. You're usually the first one, Bob. Tonight you're the last one. But that's okay. Good to have you with us. Folks, hey, the world is pretty wild. So I plan to stream tomorrow after the debate is over. Now, I don't know exactly what I'll be doing for my job. Oh, Diana's in Orlando, Florida. Welcome, Diana. I don't know exactly what I'll be doing for my job tomorrow night. All of that's still up in the air. But between covering the debate for my job, which I may or may not do, I intend to get on here and just react to the debate. I'll be watching every minute of it, taking notes, reacting to different parts. I will definitely be doing that. I wouldn't miss that opportunity, having written the book about Kamala Harris that got banned, for Christ's sakes. David in China. Welcome, David. So that is happening. Have no fear. There you go, Carter. Always the historian. That is a good question. So, yeah. Often I put on some music. Oh, thank you, Gala. Often I put on some music at this time in the lives, but not tonight. I think I'm just going to start answering people's questions. So why don't I do that? I'll just start answering people's questions as they come in. Gala says, the guest on Jimmy Dore's show just predicted that Kamala winning based on his Google data analysis. Alan Lichtman also predicts Kamala will be the winner. Well, I disagree with you, Gala. I think Trump is going to win if it's a fair election because Kamala Harris is incoherent. Kamala Harris doesn't have a personality. And the economy right now is leaving a lot to be desired. And I just don't think Kamala is generating enthusiasm among her supporters. They're trying. I mean, they're trying, but it's not happening. Not happening. So, you know, I don't see that, right? And I see the New York Times and ABC both saying that Trump is going to win. And I see enthusiasm in the Trump side, and I do not see enthusiasm in the Harris camp. Now, we'll see how the debate goes tomorrow night. I mean, I'm expecting just a blowout. But, you know, that's not generally how these things go. This is the only debate, from what I understand. There's only one debate. And I'm expecting Trump will just completely blow her out of the water. But we'll see. I mean, we will see. I mean, things never go exactly as predicted. So we'll see. We will see. We'll see. I mean, I feel like if it's just a complete blowout, that might make me a little nervous because the voting is still over a month away. But I'll also say this. Okay, if you remember the 2016 election, which Trump won by surprise. People did not expect Trump to win. All the polls said Hillary Clinton had it in the bag, and then Trump won. If you remember the 2016 election, one thing that was going on in the lead up to that election was it seemed like there was a lot of backroom negotiations going on. The FBI couldn't make up its mind about what side it was on. For a while, it seemed like the FBI was solidly against Trump, solidly for Hillary, but then at the last minute, the FBI opened up the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails and made a press conference about it. And for a while, it got very weird. It got very, very weird. And you remember there was the whole thing with Ted Cruz, who didn't endorse Trump in his speech. He said, vote your conscience. He didn't say vote for Trump, and he got booed. And it was like in the lead up to Trump's electoral victory in 2016, the government was constantly, the behind the scenes forces, the intelligence agencies, the TV networks, and others, it seemed like they were constantly renegotiating what side they were on. Right? For a while, it seemed they were solidly against Trump, but then they were giving Trump a chance, but then they weren't. But then the FBI was here, and then the FBI was there. And you'll remember the FBI, it seemed like they were for Trump at the last minute. And then almost immediately after he won, they turned against him again. And then Trump fired James Comey, and there was that whole thing. I'm noticing that now. The New York Times is suddenly telling us Trump is going to win. ABC is telling us Trump is going to win. And it's like, I feel like there are some within the ruling class that are solid that Trump cannot be president. And there are some within the ruling class, in particular in the lower levels of capital, that are solidly in Trump's camp. But there's starting to be an increasing number of forces that say, okay, Trump can win, but it has to be on our terms. Right? We'll let you win, Donald Trump. You can win, but you have to make a deal with us first, and you have to say the right things, and you have to make us some promises. So we would be okay with you being in office, but you have to, in the next couple weeks, you have to dance like a little monkey for us, and you have to say all of our favorite words, and we have to really, I mean, we might be okay with you winning, Donald, if you do the right somersaults for us, and and I feel like that's going on right now. There is a layer of the forces that were solidly against Trump when he left office that are starting to say, okay, Trump can win this. If he doesn't win this, we're going to have, it'll demoralize the country. And Kamala Harris is not very likable and all that, but we're really, we're not really enjoying this, right? We're holding our nose to let you win, Donald. So in the next couple of weeks, if you can make certain promises to us and make certain backroom deals, we'll let you get through. But I feel like that's going on right now in a lot of back rooms, in the intelligence agencies, and elsewhere. There are folks that are saying, okay, Trump can win again, but, right? And that there's increasingly becoming a bigger and bigger gray area. And I think that Donald Trump, I would argue, I think Trump is going to win. And I think when that bullet didn't hit his face and it hit his ear, I think at that point he won the election. Because this is America. This is America. We love the underdog. And the economy is bad, and people are against the establishment. They're against the status quo. And Donald Trump has decked himself in the armor and the rhetoric of being against the establishment. He's embraced RFK and Tulsi, and this is America, right? And part of America is that we have this freedom, anti-authoritarianism mindset. And he almost got killed and he survived. And that epic photo, the fight, and the ear, and I think he's going to win. And the fact that he's humanizing himself on the podcasts, and the fact that Kamala Harris is his opponent and she just doesn't seem like a human being. She's totally plastic. I think Trump is going to win. I'm confident that Trump is going to win. I could be wrong. And I also am saying that I think Trump winning is the better outcome, even though Trump did awful things as president, could very well do awful things. My prediction is that after Trump wins, they will amp up all the bad things that Donald Trump did, that Donald Trump says. Anti-immigrant stuff will get amped up. Pro-Israel will get amped up. And that's why what we do in the aftermath of Trump's victory is going to be very important. We need to be out there with this image. We need to have the image of Trump shaking hands with Kim Jong-un everywhere. And we need to be in the streets at Trump Tower when they're celebrating. We need to have a big banner that says this. We need to do our best to nudge the Trump movement in a good direction, because all the forces of evil are going to try and take every bad thing that Trump said and amplify it. That's part of how they're going to let him win, right? If Trump only said good, revolutionary, anti-war things, they would never let him win. And I feel like, especially in the aftermath of a victory, they're going to try to make it a mandate for bad things. And our job is to try and make it a mandate for good things. That's our job. So we shall see. We shall see how things go. Next question. I think Kamala Harris is very narcissistic, as she lacks empathy, and is driven by power. She loves that word power, doesn't she? People with narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, see themselves as victims. Well, that is correct. I mean, Kamala Harris is indifferent to other people's feelings. Kamala Harris sees herself as a victim. She is obsessed with power. So in that sense, yes, she's a narcissist. But she also doesn't hold herself to high standards, and she doesn't have a real creative drive. She doesn't have what I would call a healthy narcissism. She's not creative. That's the point that I was making. That's what I was getting at. But yeah, in the sense that she doesn't see other people's feelings as necessary, and the fact that she is obsessed with getting medals and badges and laurels pinned on herself, and that's driven her entire life. She wants to be this powerful, important person. Why? Because that's an end unto itself, not because she wants to do anything good with that position, just because, right? That seems to be what Kamala's all about. That seems to be what Kamala's all about, but for not good reasons, for just reasons of self-aggrandizement or whatever. So there we go. So yeah. All right. Now the next super chat, John McCarthy has sent a 7-minute video. That's a summary of the Uhuru trial. I'm going to put that on because that's very, very important. So let's download that. And John was there for the first week, and we appreciate, and I was out there for the first day of the trial for the weekend before. And, the Uhuru trial is a very, very important case. It's very terrifying. How could this case have even gone to trial is my question, right? How did they not stop this from going to trial? I mean, how did they not say there's no evidence of a crime here? But anyway, so let's watch. Thank you, John, for sending. Very, very important. Let's watch this summary of the first week of the Uhuru trial. Thank you, John. We are following that closely. Here we go.
That's right, Stephanie. We are here outside of the Tampa Federal Courthouse, where on the top floor in courtroom 17, the Uhuru free speech trial of the century is about to enter its second week. So we're going to recap the first week for you. The first week of the free speech trial of Chairman Amalia Shatella, Penny Hess, and Jesse Neville left observers shaking their heads and asking how the government has dedicated over 30 FBI agents over the course of 3 years, conducted military raids on peaceful U.S. residents, offered a $10 million reward for information, and still has no case. With only one witness left, the prosecution has failed to present any actual knowledge or evidence of the government's baseless charges that the Uhuru Three are secret pawns in a Russian government conspiracy to sow political discord and interfere in elections. The government has made the outlandish accusation that Amalia Shatella, chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, as well as 2 leaders of the organization's Solidarity component, Jesse Neville and Penny Hess, were paid for and under the control of the Russian government when they took a petition to the UN charging the US with genocide, testified at UN hearings for reparations to African people, published an article opposing the ban on Russian athletes in the Olympics, ran for public office on a reparations platform, and spoke out against US-NATO proxy war using Ukraine against Russia. The Uhuru Three have expressed these same opinions and fought for the right of Black people to vote and run candidates in elected office for over 50 years. The government's first expert witness was a professor of political science at Syracuse University. He shared his views on Russian intelligence services, but admitted that he knows nothing about the Uhuru Three case. The prosecution's other expert witness was a counterintelligence and cybersecurity consultant and professor. The government referenced this witness's writings in their response to the Uhuru Three's motion to dismiss, arguing that the term disinformation does not refer to information that is necessarily false. Rather, the government said it refers to information that makes the government look bad. On the stand, this expert witness presented concepts from his latest book. When cross-examined, he confessed he did not have any direct knowledge of the Uhuru Three case. A string of FBI special agents took the stand and gave tedious testimony on each of their narrowly assigned scope of duties. They described photos of possessions found in raids on the defendants' homes, such as books on a shelf and scraps of paper. They read serial numbers from computers and phones. Court observers were incredulous as one FBI special agent took the stand and began to read through the same emails and WhatsApp messages that previous witnesses had already read. An FBI digital forensics agent described how he copied and compiled data from seized documents, emails, iCloud accounts, and Facebook messages in order to create summary reports consisting of only those portions chosen for them to see by their supervisors. In other words, they combine bits of information out of context in order to fabricate a false narrative. The government claims that Chairman O'Malley came into the employment and control of the Russian government in 2015 when he traveled to Moscow to speak at a conference organized by the Anti-Globalization Movement of Russia, an NGO. In his opening argument, Uhuru 3 attorney Mutaki Akbar turned that story right side up. He reminded the jury that 2014 was a pivotal year for the rise of social movements in the US protesting police violence after a string of police killings of Black people. The Uhuru movement was a prominent voice in those protests. It received many offers of support, including from the Anti-Globalization Movement of Russia. So it was the leadership of the Uhuru movement that attracted support from around the country and the world. It was not the orders of a Russian NGO that caused the Uhuru movement to do the work or express the opinions it had been doing for more than 50 years. Week one of the trial proceedings also included a Russian-born FBI special agent who testified that reading the documents given to her by her supervisor convinced her that the NGO leader of the AGMR, Alexander Ionov, was an asset of Russian intelligence. Then, under cross-examination, she admitted she didn't have any direct contact with any Russian nationals and did not do any independent fact-checking of the documents she was given to read. The prosecution introduced communications from the NGO AGMR's president, Ionov, seeking to discuss Jesse Neville's 2017 campaign for St. Petersburg mayor. Under cross-examination, this FBI agent admitted that the government has no evidence that Neville ever worked with Ionov on the local electoral campaign, nor did he receive any campaign donations from any Russian. Chairman O'Malley has explained that while the Uhuru 3 are clearly innocent according to the law, the government hopes that the specter of Russia, 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 and black, black, black will sway the jury to rule based on prejudice rather than on facts. The Uhuru 3 are hoping that members of the jury will see through the government's fabrication and decide to preserve the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment protection of free speech and dissenting opinion. The trial continues today, Monday, September 9th, with cross-examination of the latest FBI agent, followed by one more government witness. Then the Uhuru 3 attorneys will begin their defense, and the trial may go to jury deliberations as early as later this week. The case is being heard on the 17th floor of the Tampa Federal Court. It's the largest courtroom in the courthouse. It was packed with supporters all last week who spilled into an overflow room. You can follow the case on handsoffuhuru.org.
That was a great summary. Thank you for sending that, John. That was very, very informative. And that kind of matches what I've been hearing from you and from other people who were there in the courtroom. And I mean, again, if the jury is not overwhelmed with prejudice, they should be acquitted. But we shall see. I mean, if the jury, is so overwhelmed with prejudice, it may be otherwise. But I mean, the idea that the Uhuru 3 are agents of the Russian government is so absurd and so ridiculous. They're not registered properly as lobbyists that are employee of the Russian government because they're doing what they've done since the 70s is absurd. The whole case is absurd, and I hope they are acquitted. I might take this opportunity to show, if I still have it, my remarks from the do I still have that? My remarks from the courtroom, or from the first day of the trial. I posted them on the YouTube channel, but maybe I can, maybe I can show them here. Hold on. I think I will show you the remarks I made to the press. I was out. Jill Stein spoke out in front of the courthouse, and so did Charles Barron, and so did I. And I was really honored to be there in front of the courthouse with Jill Stein, and so they called me up to the podium and I gave this very short speech. And I viewed my job as the white guy in a suit to speak to the people who might not hear the other speakers, right? I viewed it as my responsibility to speak in a way that somebody who maybe isn't, all into Africa and socialism and stuff like that could hear it. So I gave these brief remarks in front of the courthouse, and I tried to do my job to make these quick remarks on behalf of CPI and try to get those listening to understand the case a little bit better. These were my remarks on the first day of the trial. Jill Stein is standing right behind me. Charles Barron, Black Alliance for Peace. Here we go.
Next, I want to introduce Caleb Maupin. Caleb is here with the Center for Political Innovation. CPI has been an early and unwavering supporter of the Uhuru 3, taking this case out to the world and speaking out and building support in the most active way. So I want to introduce Caleb. Uhuru.
Speaking behalf on the Center for Political Innovation, I want to make clear, at risk of sounding like I'm using the language of a criminal prosecutor, about why we're really here today. We are here because of the failure, the consistent failure of the Democrat Party. In 2016, the Democrat Party nominated Hillary Clinton, an awful, unpopular candidate who didn't even bother to visit Wisconsin. And rather than take responsibility for their failure, they beat the drum of Russia, Russia, Russia for 4 years. And it all amounted to nothing. And here in the Tampa Bay area, St. Petersburg, Florida, and in St. Louis, Missouri, we have seen the failure of the Democrat Party, the failure to address the needs of the African people who live in these cities. And rather than address their failure and change their policy, and rather than take responsibility, they have decided to beat this drum of Russia, Russia, Russia once again. Rather than persecuting Chairman O'Malley, they should be studying what Chairman O'Malley has achieved. Rather than persecuting the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement, they should be looking into what they have done to improve the lives of the people in these cities, studying these policies, and if they want to win, that's what they should be doing, not playing these silly games about Russia. I also want to say to those who are watching this that, with all due respect to our colleagues in the media, we have a lot of dishonest mainstream media in the United States. And one thing that mainstream media will often do is they'll focus on words, trigger words that people have a response to. And around this case, they may focus on words like socialist, words like Russia, words like African. But I urge honest listeners who love their country to think past those words and think past trigger words, because at this point, there's a lot more on trial than just these 3 defendants. The Constitution of the United States is on trial. Freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom to travel, freedom of the press is on trial in this case. There's a reason that there's been such a wide variety of forces that have spoken up in support of the Uhuru 3. There's a reason Tucker Carlson has spoken out on this case, definitely not a socialist. There's a reason Joe Rogan has spoken up about this case. This is a very serious case in which the ability of Americans to oppose war, the ability of Americans to speak their minds and to travel around the world and associate with whomever they want is on trial. So I urge everyone who's watching this case to look into the details and understand how dangerous it is to the American people and our freedom, and understand that what is happening with the continued abuse of the Foreign Agents Registration Act must be opposed and must be stopped in every way. We must stand for our freedoms. Thank you very much.
Uhuru. Thank you so much, Caleb. Next up, I want to introduce Compa.
That's interesting. I didn't. Well, anyway, so yeah, those were my remarks before in front of the courthouse. And I was hoping that I could get through to some people that maybe the other speakers wouldn't get through to. So I'm honored that they gave me a platform. I'm honored that they put me on the mic platform right next to Jill Stein. I wish, there have been a number of people who've spoken up on the behalf of the Uhuru 3, but they should have been there. Cornel West should have been there. A lot of other people who've spoken up on the case should have been there. Tucker Carlson should have been there, right? Wouldn't it have been great if Tucker Carlson had been there? But anyway, I'm paying attention to the case. John has followed the case. We at CPI, we take the case very, very seriously. So I'm glad to be there. I'm glad I was there. So now I will continue answering questions. Carter says, do you remember seeing the first Roots of Woke? Yes, there's a lot there, Carter. So let me, first of all right, so George W. Bush was president when I was first getting politically active. And it was like the very end of the Bush administration. It was pretty clear the country was going to move leftward. Barack Obama had kind of made a national name for himself. At the Democrat convention in 2004, he'd given a speech that had really gone over well with viewers. And so I remember there were two events, the U.S. social forums that were held. One was in Georgia and Atlanta, and one was in Detroit. And these were like little conventions for leftists. I went to both of them. I went to Georgia for the U.S. Social Forum, and I went to Detroit for the U.S. Social Forum. And I remember when I went to the one in Georgia, I was 19 years old. I had just joined the Workers' World Party, and they needed somebody to work the booths and hand out their leaflets at these gatherings that they had. And I remember that, all the communist groups were there, and they had their literature tables. But the bulk of the people that were at that convention at the U.S. Social Forum were not in any communist group. They were NGO employees. And that was the first time I'd ever been exposed to this type of person, right? There was, and it was weird because I'd be handing out leaflets to all the people at the U.S. Social Forum in Atlanta. Oh, we're going to have a workshop and all this. And I would talk to these people, and they were, they had pink hair and they had nose rings, and they were older than me, right? I was 19. And I remember I would talk to them, and they weren't members of any communist group. They worked at Planned Parenthood. They worked at Students Against Sweatshops. They worked at Jobs with Justice. They worked at various like liberal activist paid gigs, paid jobs. The Sylvia Rivera Law Project was a group of transgender activists that I saw. And it was like there were all these people that were older than me that, they were at this convention where every communist group was there selling their newspaper and had literature, but they were there and they were working for these nonprofits, and they were not interested in the same things I was interested in. They were interested. They were all, first of all, they were overwhelmingly white, all of them. And they were wealthy. They were from wealthy backgrounds. A lot of them were lawyers, not all of them. A lot of them had worked in a law firm. There were a lot of law firms and a lot of liberal NGOs. And you talk to them, and they were from money, and they were very interested in LGBT. And they were very interested in, racial, like academic racial stuff, like Black studies, and the way racial oppression portrays itself in white feminist literature, or whatever you want to call it. And it was very academic, and it was also very, very, very not populist in its style. And it was very, very, what would be the word? It was very like, it was almost like tourism. Like they were interested in like obscure ways to be transgender. They were interested in, like Puerto Rican lesbians, and how like the experience of Puerto Rican lesbians is different than the experience of white lesbians, or they're interested in this kind of weird stuff. And they were very, very, there were a lot of women in those circles that were very triggered all the time. That was the other thing I remember. I went to a workshop at the U.S. Social Forum that was put on by the Committees of Correspondence. I was interested in communist groups. That's why I was at the U.S. Social Forum. I was there with the Workers' World Party. I was interested in communism. I remember the Committees of Correspondence for Democracy and Socialism, which is a breakaway from the Communist Party. They had a workshop about what they stood for, about how do we move towards socialism in America. And I went to the workshop, and the workshop, it was a PowerPoint presentation, and it was about how Republicans are fascists. Republicans are fascists, and they're dangerous and all of that. And we have to defeat the Republicans. And then once we defeat the Republicans, once the Republican Party is just like demolished, which is not how a two-party system works, but once the Republicans are defeated, then the Democrats will divide between the pro-monopoly Democrats and the anti-monopoly Democrats. And the anti-monopoly Democrats will gradually start to implement socialist policies. And we won't call it socialism in America. And there won't be a revolution. It won't be like a moment where, there's a revolution. It'll just be like gradually we'll get free healthcare, we'll get free education, and there'll be some like vague name for it. And it'll just kind of gradually happen. And like 100 years from now, we'll basically be living in socialism, but we won't call it that here in America. And it'll be really democratic. And it'll be really, it'll look nothing like communist governments around the world, and it'll be, it'll have a big emphasis on LGBT. And I remember sitting in that workshop and just thinking, what the hell is this? The Republican Party is not just going to go away, right? And I just thought the whole thing was weird. So I raised my hand and I said, well, isn't there an issue? It's not an issue of defeating Republicans. It's an issue of like power and like, what about the state and stuff like that? I raised my hand and I said this. After I spoke, before they answered my question, this woman behind me who had a nose ring spoke, and she was like 10 years older than me. And she spoke, right? And she had a nose ring, and she had like short hair that was like, combed over her head. It wasn't purple, I don't think. And I'm so triggered by that guy's talking about power and authority. I don't want anyone to have power and authority over anyone. It's like she's about to cry in response to my question. I'm like, Jesus Christ. I'm like, what's wrong with this? And she's up there, that's what scares me about communist groups. And then she's like attacking the Committees of Correspondence group for having me there asking the question. I asked, well, what about the state? What about the government? What about power? I don't think the Republicans are just going to go away. And then they hand the microphone to her and she's like, oh my God, I'm triggered by power and scary authoritarian men that are going to, and she's like having a meltdown. And I'm just like, what? I had never seen anybody like that before. Right. And that's now like, that's what all the woke protesters are. They're that. Right. And that was like, I remember thinking like, what the hell is that? Right. So then the mic went back to the speaker. And the woman who was putting on the workshop, she looked at me and this kind of condescending smile. She's like, I thought the same thing when I was your age, young man. We're not going to be storming the Winter Palace. We're not the Bolsheviks. It's going to be just a gradual process, one step at a time. It was what I was hearing was Bernstein, right? It was the movement is everything, the goal is nothing. And the woman I was hearing it from, she was probably a real communist. She was just like, a reform. She was like a Communist Party USA revisionist, basically. She wasn't triggered by me talking about the state and all of that. And she'd read all those books, and she this was a woman who remembered the 60s. This was an older woman. And she had been a real communist at one point, and she wasn't triggered by what I was saying. She just didn't believe in it anymore. She'd become a reformist social democrat. But the woman behind me, I was like, what the hell is this? Right. And this woman who's older than me is like, she's like triggered and having a meltdown by my question about state power. And that was woke. The other thing that I remember was, so I was in the Workers' World Party, and the Workers' World Party had a woman in it named, well, I shouldn't say a woman. It had a person in it who presented as male, but was, you called them she, because they wanted to raise awareness. And she was Leslie Feinberg. Leslie Feinberg was like the first transgender activist in American history, and she was with them. And Leslie Feinberg was like a saint at these events. She was like a celebrity because she was the first transgender activist, and she was going around speaking at all the colleges about being transgender. And she was, in those years, she was almost having like a panic attack because she supported North Korea and she supported Iran and she supported she was a Stalinist communist, basically. I mean, she was a Marxiste, and she was horrified that the LGBT movement was turning into a vehicle to spread imperialism. And she spent the final years of her political activity before she got Lyme disease and was inactive for many years before she died. She spent like the final years of her life going around like yelling at the LGBT movement for being pro-imperialist. But even within the Workers' World Party, there was this odd culture of like, you can't disagree with someone if they are more oppressed than you, right? And it was weird. And I had not seen this in other communist groups. The older communist groups weren't like that. You know, the Revolutionary Communist Party, you know, they were almost the opposite, right? They had us going to black churches with newspapers. God is the original fascist. And, you know, they had us, we were quite insensitive. And we were, you know, we followed the great white leader, Bob Avakian. And, you know, I mean, he was the savior of black people and whatever. I mean, they were quite insensitive on racial matters. But in the Workers' World Party, there was this whole thing of like, if a woman says something and you're a man, you're not allowed to disagree with them, or you're being sexist. If a black person says something and you disagree with them and you're white, then you're not allowed to do that. You're being sexist. And, you know, you know, I was joining the group at the time, and part of the hazing in the group, if you're a white person, is they accuse you of being racist, and you know, when they don't mean it, and you have to like, you know, you have to not fight back, basically. You know, it's like they test you, you know, and so, you know, I was experiencing that. And I remember like, you know, the one time, I mean, I was not a full member, I don't think, at the time of the US Social Forum, but I remember we were planning a workshop. They had a youth workshop at the US Social Forum, and I had like sent an email with like suggestions about what the workshop should be. And then they had one of the other youth who was on the email list, who was black, a woman who was 3 or 4 years older than me, call me up on the phone. Excuse me? How did you think that was appropriate to send that email? I'm like, what do you mean? I just said that I think we should do this or that. Well, that was condescending, and we don't need your white man opinions. And, you know, it was, you know, stuff like that. And that was just kind of the culture of the Workers' World Party. That's how they developed. I mean, it was pretty toxic. And I learned after a while being in the group that there were just certain red lines you couldn't cross, right? I mean, you know, if they played that card, right, you had to stop talking immediately, right? You know, and that there was no defense, right? If you were saying something and then they said you're a white man, you have to shut up, you know? And I learned that the hard way, and I just learned that, okay, you know, there are just certain limits of what I can do in this group, right? And I was very committed to being in a communist group, and I believed in what I was doing. And, you know, so it was like, this was a group I could be with. They let me write for their newspaper. They let me, you know, speak at some of their conferences. And I was in Cleveland at that point, organizing. They had a newspaper I could distribute. And it was just like, okay, this group has kind of an unhealthy, toxic culture. You know, there's a lot of internal, like, yelling at each other and stuff, but whatever. I just thought, okay, I'll take it, you know, whatever. And then I moved to New York. That's a whole nother story, but I mean, is that woke? Yeah, that's woke. But this was, again, before woke. This was an old school communist group that still did talk about workers control the means of production. However, you know, fast forward 5 or 6 years, one thing that would happen in communist groups, I'm fine, Gala, much love. But one thing that would happen in communist groups, and I remember this, was so people would, one thing that happens, and a lot of communist groups this happens, is like college-aged young people, they join communist groups, and they then go and get jobs at labor unions, right? The labor unions hire like left-wing young people, and they hire them to be labor union staffers, labor union employees. And so there were a lot of people in the Workers' World Party who went to like, you know, they were in college, they were in like the University of North Carolina or whatever. And then they got hired by hotel employees, restaurant employees, HERE, or they got hired by the United Food and Commercial Workers or the AFL-CIO outright. They got hired by some labor union, right? They got hired by a labor union. And the labor unions, they do these like summer camps for their employees where they take them to, like, they have the unions own property. They have, and like in Michigan, I think there's a big United Auto Workers camp, right? It's just like a summer camp that they own. It's like I don't know what you want to call it, a dacha or whatever. I mean, it's just like they have this place in upstate Michigan that they own. And if you're going to be a UAW employee, or if you're going to be an employee of one of these unions, you go to like a place in the woods and you do like a 2-week training program. And those training programs are very woke, right? And they do the whole, if you hear me clap once, if you hear me clap twice, if you hear me clap 3 times, right? And they kind of like, they do these kind of like group bonding activities with these people, and they teach them how to organize. Or they teach them these methods of organizing that are very ineffective. I mean, the labor movement in the United States is, it's like weaker than it's ever been. So these methods are the great way to organize. I mean, give me a break. We haven't seen a big victory for the labor movement since like the Teamsters organized UPS in 1995. Okay. Like the labor movement is very, very weak, but they have these like very textbook ways of organizing people. And they do the very infantile, if you hear me clap once, if you hear me clap twice. We don't raise our hand at the meeting. We have this cute little bouncy ball that we throw to people. And they do that, and the kind of infantilization of organizing, it's like 5th grade. That people would learn that in the labor unions when they would get a union job. Their training would do that, and then they would take that into the communist group, right? And that happened in every communist group. They would learn this kind of like kindergarten organizing style, and then they would bring it into the communist group and be like, well, I learned these very new professional techniques that we have in our organizing the union. And they would bring it into the communist group, and they would start acting that way. And I am convinced, so it's been revealed that some of that stuff actually came from Scientology, right? Some of that stuff originated in Scientology. Harvey Jackins and that whole thing. The privilege walk is an exercise that they do at those things where it's like, if your family had more than this amount of money, take 1 step forward. If you did this, then you take another step forward. And it's like it's like whoever's the furthest ahead, is the most privileged person or something. They do these kind of like infantile, workshops, but then there's also this element of like oversharing, right? Where you talk about, very personal things, and you talk about, I don't know, it's weird. It's like, so on the one hand, they're kind of treating you like a child. On the other hand, it kind of turns into group therapy. And then there's a real frown on actual knowledge, right? There's this feeling that knowing facts is racist. Knowing data, being able to quote books and all of that is somehow making other people uncomfortable. And if you go to one of these, if you go to this kind of space, it's like a method of running a group, right? And it would come from the labor bureaucracy. They would bring it into the communist groups, and it's like, so we're all gonna, if you hear me clap once, if you hear me clap twice, we're gonna sit in a circle and talk about our favorite ice cream or something like that. And then And then there's also, we're going to talk about like deeply emotional experiences. Women get up and talk about when they were sexually harassed and how bad they felt about it. People talk about discrimination, and it's like, so we're going to, like, at the same time that we're acting like kindergarten, we're also going to get up and have people start crying while they talk about ways that they were mistreated. And then there's also, then if you know anything, that is, no, we don't do that here, right? If you know actual data about the economy and how it's organized, no, we don't do that here. If you've read Marxist books, you understand facts about Lenin and history, no, we don't do that here. We do these kind of kindergarten bonding activities. We cry a lot and talk about our painful childhood memories. And then, and it is some kind of CIA thing. I'm convinced this came from the intelligence agencies. It's some kind of brainwashing thing that they developed. And it's really anti-intellectual. It is like knowing anything about communism, knowing anything about economics, knowing anything about anything is, we don't do that here, right? And they immediately, if you know anything about, especially if this is a communist group, you're supposed to be talking about communism. If you know anything about communism, they immediately label that autistic, white, and male, which it's not, right? There's plenty of black people who know all about it. There's, but they immediately like, no, we don't do communism here. That's autistic white male. No. We're interested in and this kindergarten stuff. This is what women like. You're too male. You're using aggressive male words, and you're too, all knowing all these books and all. That's a white people thing. White people read books. People of color don't read books. That's right. It's weird, right? In the name of their like social justice, it's like, you're not allowed to actually believe in communism. Instead, we do this kind of kindergarten stuff, and we cry about our emotional experiences. And it's very, very odd. And all the communist groups started getting this way. Starting in around the time of Occupy Wall Street, like 2011, 2012, 2013, all the communist groups got this way. The Communist Party USA got this way. The Workers' World Party got this way. PSL is like this. It is just like this. The Freedom Road Socialist Organization, all of them got this way, right? And it got weird. And it was, no, RCP is definitely not like this, but that's a whole nother story. But it got weird, and it was that NGO culture coming into the communist groups is really what it was, right? It was, all the NGOs were already like that. I didn't know that because I don't come from, I didn't grow up in New York City. I didn't grow up in Los Angeles. I don't come from the wealthy families that, these people are from wealthy backgrounds. They've all got relatives who went to Harvard and Yale, and there's an ethnic component to this. Again, there are people of all different ethnic backgrounds and all of that, but there's a certain ethnic group, and I think you know who I'm talking about, that is very prominent among them, and they're very anti-Israel and all of that. So I'm not saying this is all a big conspiracy, but there is a certain ethnic group that is very highly represented among them, for historical reasons that make all kinds of perfect sense, right? It's not a big conspiracy, but there is a certain ethnic group that is highly represented. I'm going to get canceled for saying that probably, but who cares? Right. And, they're from New York City. They're from Los Angeles. They're working at Planned Parenthood or Jobs with Justice or Students Against Sweatshops or a labor union. And, and they're making pretty good money. A lot of them are making six figures. Most of them are making six figures at these well-paying jobs that are paid for by the Rockefellers and the Ford Foundation and all of that. And part of doing these jobs is they go through this brainwashing kind of at their jobs, right? They go through this kind of brainwashing in order to work at their jobs. And it was like this stuff started seeping into the actual communist organizations, right? And the actual communist groups were not like this. They had their own thing. But then this stuff from the labor union bureaucracy and from the feminist LGBT Sylvia Rivera Law Project and I don't know Planned Parenthood and all this stuff started seeping into the communist groups. And the communist groups, they just got toxic. I mean, you couldn't be an actual communist and be in those groups, right? I'll show you, right? I'll show you, right? I'll just show it to you, right? Why not, right? I'll show you what the communist groups have gotten like, right? If you want to see it for yourself, I think it's just best that you see it for yourself, right? Don't take my word for it. People say that sometimes people say that what I say about other groups and all that's not accurate. Let's hear it from the horse's mouth, right? One of the groups that became this way is the Party of Socialism and Liberation. They PSL, they became this way, very, very much became this way. And so on the anniversary of Lenin's death, the Party of Socialism and Liberation decided to have a podcast about Lenin. And I'll show you a little bit of it, right? This is what they think a podcast about Lenin and the Bolsheviks, about the history of Leninism and communism. This is what they think a good workshop is. And I will show it to you. I could mock it. I could be mean about it. I'm not even going to do that. Just watch it for yourself. They don't make a single point the entire time. And it's just, this is the Party of Socialism and Liberation. This is their Lenin podcast, right? If you want to know all about Lenin, watch this podcast. This is, and read the comments on their YouTube channel. They think this is an awesome podcast. They think it's great. They think it's just tremendous. Right.
Hey, talking to people, doing outreach, having meetings, there's all these strategic questions that people aren't having, but you can read Lenin out of context, right? And all of a sudden you just have the answers.
Exactly.
If it was that easy, then why wouldn't we have socialism already?
That's literally insane. That's literally. But so the first time I read Lenin with comrades, I read Left Wing Communism, and when I tell you that book changed my life, Lenin is so freaking smart.
Yeah.
Smart. But also, this man is saying exactly what I needed to hear. He was saying just how possible it is for working class people and peasants, mind you, because the peasants
go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I feel like that is kind of an ethos that I had before I joined the party, but after being in a political revolutionary Marxist Leninist space, is okay, we're going together, we're building unity with so much intention that once we've had this debate, discussion, there's disagreements, what have you, when we make a decision collectively, I trust that me and all my comrades will carry it out to the best of our ability. And that
group of rich people who are enacting a dictatorship over the rest of us, using the police as
violence or sexual harassment on the job. There is not really a reliable process that we have to protect each other right now. And so some of those people under the worker state are going to be thrown into prisons that exist.
Yeah, it's you watch it, they barely, it's they barely make a coherent political point. And, and you read the comments, they all think it's awesome. They think that's an awesome podcast. They think it's tremendous. They just think it's great, right? And, when I posted criticism of it in their comment section, their response was, "Shut up, white man. You're white. How dare you?" Right? This is awesome, right? And it's just, they talk about their feelings. They talk about how joining a group is awesome. And Lenin is a smart guy, dude. It's cool. They're just stupid. You listen to this. there are plenty of women and plenty of people of color that can speak about Lenin intelligently, but none of them are in the PSL, and it's just like this culture of, if you know anything about communism, if you know anything about economics, if you know anything about history, you're a racist, sexist, autistic white male. And like, we just kind of cry about our emotions and we throw the bouncy ball. And yeah, I mean, that's what I consider to be woke, right? It is this kind of oppression politics, oppression theory. We talk about oppression and how unfair it is. We talk about different types of oppression in this weird academic, like, what is the experience of Puerto Rican transgendered people compared to, and I don't know, that when you talk about woke politics, that's what I consider woke politics. Okay. And that stuff started, that's kind of my experience of seeing that stuff gain dominance. I think what it was that after the failure of the Bush administration, the liberals, the CIA regime change apparatus that runs the Color Revolution NGOs, they got the upper hand. They got the upper hand. And so in order to have the upper hand, they needed to really make sure there was no genuine communist politics. If you look at the political crisis of the 1960s, what happened was McCarthyism had come in after the Second World War. The Communist Party was they were part of the Roosevelt coalition. And so McCarthyism came in, and McCarthyism just crushed the Communist Party. But McCarthyism turned into a vehicle for the military industrial complex and some middle class elements to fight the American establishment. And so the ultra rich, the Rockefellers and others, pushed back against McCarthyism with their foundations, with the Ford Foundation, with McGeorge Bundy and all of that. And they pushed back against it, and they funded the civil rights movement and other things to push back. And they created an opening. And out of that, you got the Black Panthers and you got Students for a Democratic Society. And you had an actual communist insurgency in the United States. You got by 1968, 69, there was a genuine, solid anti-imperialist bloc to some degree within certain layers of U.S. society. And so then as things stabilized, you had the rise of neoconservatism, and it was kind of gotten rid of. And I think what it was, like generals fighting the last war, they wanted to make sure that as they boosted the left, there was no danger of the left, of an actual left asserting itself. And I think that's really what it was. They wanted to make sure that this time, whatever left they boosted was not going to actually become a genuine anti-imperialist movement, right? And that's what that was about. It was like, okay, we're going to, liberals are going to have the upper hand, and the regime change, color revolution, Eastern establishment is going to have the upper hand, but they need to make sure, absolutely make sure, that they do not, it's interesting. I know people who went to Cuba, right? The Venceremos brigades, they go to Cuba every year. They defy the travel ban. It's like they go as an act of civil disobedience. They violate the travel ban. They go to Cuba every year. And people talked about how in the Venceremos brigades, like every year in the Venceremos brigades, they have a big fight, and there's like a witch hunt, and that, they accuse somebody of being racist or something like that. And there's like a woke, and it started happening in the Venceremos brigades every year that they gang up on somebody on the delegation and decide they're racist and sexist. And and it's clearly, the Venceremos brigades, most of the people involved, I think, are just genuine people that support Cuba. But of course, the Venceremos brigades, like anything like that, is going to be crawling with informants and spies and all of that. And I noticed that that's one thing, starting in like the early 2000s, every year the Venceremos brigades would have some kind of woke fight where, a bunch of the people on the trip would all gang up on somebody, usually a white male, and accuse them of being racist, sexist, homophobic, or something like that. And they would, there'd be an ugly, like, show trial in the Vince Ramos brigades, an ugly, like, call out struggle session in the Vince Ramos brigades. And I am convinced that's part of where this came from. You know, the CIA, was experimenting. How do we manipulate left-wing people, right? How do we control left-wing people? How do we, they say in intelligence circles, you're an asset, not when you're consciously working for the intelligence agency, but when they know how to predict your behavior, right? And a lot of the communist groups in America are like that. The government doesn't tell them what to do, but the government knows exactly what they will do under any given circumstance. They're not worried about them, and they're actually kind of useful to some degree or other, right? Black Lives Matter, a genuine uprising among the black community against police brutality, but it was nudged and used to depose Donald Trump because Donald Trump was considered a threat to American imperialism. Well, how were they able to do that? Well, I mean, it's very clear that they knew how a lot of the key actors in Black Lives Matter could be manipulated. They didn't call up all the groups involved. They just knew how to push on them. And then Black Lives Matter Incorporated was funded by George Soros. Those were all George Soros staffers, former Teach for America teachers. That whole thing was completely, but then on top of that, there were a lot of communist groups that were involved in Black Lives Matter, but those groups had been so messed with and so wokeified, and they knew how to nudge them so well that they went along with it, right? It's very clear that, right, there was a genuine anger in the black community about police brutality. And then there was a strategic decision by the ruling class to weaponize it against Donald Trump. That was very clear. To create instability, to set the stage for Donald Trump losing the 2020 election during the pandemic, and to control the rising anger among the population during the pandemic, and to separate the economic anger about the pandemic from from the black community, right? To make it so, white people are anti-vaccine and black people are mad about police brutality, and to kind of fracture. I mean, it served a purpose, right? And that's the thing. I don't think, I think many people were horrified by what happened to George Floyd. It wasn't all a big conspiracy. Something happened, and the way these things work is that, something happens and then they nudge a certain direction. And that's the game that intelligence agencies play. It's like, how do they have certain things they want to push, certain narratives they want to push about different countries, about politics, about changing the culture in certain ways. And things happen and people do things, but they are there kind of pushing whatever does happen, pushing what people say in a certain way. And the less fingerprints they have, the better, right? The more if they're identified as doing it, it's not going to work, right? The more that it looks just natural and spontaneous, the better. That's how these things work. So I don't know. I mean, it's just, we can talk all about this, but at the end of the day, the anti-populist left, right? The anti-populist left is very, it is very much, it's paid for by the Rockefellers and by the Ford Foundation and all of that. And it developed kind of a weird mind control infantilization tactic, that it developed, and that kind of seeped in and became what leftism is. And anti-populism, let's just talk about that. Anti-populism is a big part of the Zionist mindset. Zionism is based on the idea that Jews are so special, they're just so much smarter than everybody else, they're just so much better than everybody else, that they're always going to be persecuted, so they have to have their own country in Israel. That's the premise of Zionism. Zionism says deep down, non-Jews are all, Nazis, right? Deep down, non-Jews are all Nazis. And so that's why you have to create Israel. So Jews can go there and get away from all of us that are all just a bunch of Nazis, right? So the idea is the people are the enemy. Zionism is the fullest expression of what Lenin called the spirit of the ghetto. Lenin called out the Bundists. The Bundists in Russia were not Zionists. They were Jews, but they were socialists. But they said we have to have a separate socialist group for Jews because we're always going to be persecuted and all of that. And Lenin, who was himself Jewish, said, no, I want nothing to do with this. This is a mindset. This is the spirit of the ghetto. And this is a problem. And I think that part of this woke thing, and and a lot of the people that join these circles are not themselves Jewish, right? I understand Vosh is not Jewish, right? I mean, many people said he was, but I understand he's Polish. But it doesn't matter, because you go to one of these woke events where everyone's getting up and crying about their feelings, and we're doing this kindergarten stuff, right? This kindergarten thing, and it's like it cultivates a mindset where you're like vulnerable and afraid of people and triggered by mass movements, power, facts, history. All of that is scary, fascism, and you get into this like triggered scare, like that woman behind me, right? I don't know if she was Jewish or not. It doesn't matter. It's not the point. It's not about ethnicity, right? That woman who, when I asked a question about Lenin at the beginning of this question that you asked me, Carter, that woman, when I asked the question about Lenin and she's like, oh my God, I'm scared. That mindset, that's what that kind of brainwashing that the woke people do, that's what it cultivates. That woman may not have been Jewish, but it cultivates a mindset that is a Zionist mindset. It is the spirit of the ghetto mindset. The people are the enemy. Everyone's out to get us, so we need our safe space. That's what Israel is. Israel's a giant safe space, right? Because all of human history has just been a big conspiracy to persecute the Jews because they're just so much better than all of us, right? I mean, they're just the greatest people ever, and we're just a bunch of evil, inferior Nazis deep down. And so clearly they need their giant safe space in Palestine, to be safe from all of us inferior, hateful bigots, I mean, Zionism is wokeism, right? It is the ultimate wokeism, right? It is anti-populism. It is the belief that the people are the enemy. It is the belief that any mass movement of any kind is inherently Nazi and fascist. Zionism is wokeism, I mean, that's what it is. And so, and that the woke shops, they're cultivating you to think like a liberal Zionist, right? Conservative Zionists are just white supremacists. They admire apartheid in South Africa. Some of them, that's a different thing. Ben Shapiro, the Netanyahu crowd are a different thing, but liberal Zionism is wokeism. It is, oh my God, everyone's just so mean to us. Every country we go to, we get persecuted and all this, and so we have to have a special safe space to get away from all the inferior ones. When they worship Jesus, what they're saying is that we're all Christ killers. Have you ever seen a crucifix? That's a thing they wear around their neck to say that we killed their God, to say kill the Jews. That's what a crucifix means. It means kill the Jews. They say that's what liberal Zionists are like. I have met them. I live in New York City. I'm surrounded by liberal Zionists. They think that Christianity, I was told by one of my Zionist coworkers, all religions except for Judaism are just an excuse to kill Jews. That's what he said to me. All religions except for Judaism are an excuse to kill Jews. That the crucifix is, Christians wear that because they're saying that Jews killed Jesus and that's why they hate Jews. I mean, they live in this weird world where all of humanity is out to get them. All of humanity is out to get them because they're just better than everybody else, because they're the superior group and everyone else is just not as smart as they are, and everyone else is just, and so they need this giant safe space in the desert to keep them safe from all the, I mean, look, and these are the kind of things that people get mad at me for saying. I just have to call it what it is. I mean, Zionism is toxic and evil. But leftism has been taken over by soft Zionism, or this, what Lenin called the spirit of the ghetto. It has. And that's a big part of wokeism. A big part of wokeism is this, the spirit of the ghetto, I guess, the Zionist mindset, right? And it's the liberal form of it, right? The conservative Zionists, they're just like, we're civilized Europeans. All these Muslims are inferior. They're inferior brown people. Look at South Africa. It was so much better when the settlers ran it. I mean, they're just racist. And they all like Trump. They all like evangelicals. They like Donald Trump. they're a different brand altogether. And a lot of them are not white Europeans, or they're all white, but a lot of them are not from America or Britain. A lot of the conservative Zionists tend to be from Eastern Europe. They tend to be from Russia. They tend to be from Czechoslovakia, Romania, places like that. And they are just like, they're just like, we are white and Arabs and Muslims are inferior. And that's what they think. And they like Trump. And that's Ben Shapiro's crowd. That's Sheldon Adelson's crowd. That's a different thing. But the bulk of American and British Zionists are liberal Zionists that have this permanent victim mindset. They're triggered, they're scared, and anyway, I don't know. I've said this all to you all a million times, but it's a big part of when we talk about what woke is. I mean, that's a big part of it. And so it is what it is, It is what it is. And that a big part of woke, let me just say this, a big part of it is getting people to define themselves by their trauma. Getting people to define themselves by how they're a victim, getting people to think of themselves as victims. And what are they doing in those woke shops when they're throwing the bouncy ball and you're talking about your favorite ice cream and your pizza? They're making you, they're regressing you to childhood. They're making you feel powerless, right? They're subtly reducing you to being a child. When you're a child, you have no power. Right. And so they're reducing you to being a child. Right. Right. And then after they reduce you to a childlike state, then from there, they're triggering you. And they get a bunch of people to talk about the times they were sexually harassed, the times they were abused, and so now they've gotten you to a vulnerable state where you feel powerless. And then they're going to trigger you, and all your painful memories and all of that are going to come back. And you're going to be scared of the world. And so you're like a scared child. You're going to follow your parent, right? You're just going to obey your parent. Keep me safe, parent. Keep me safe, parent. And they get you into that mindset of, they said that racists, have to be banned from Facebook, and that if you support Russia, you're racist. So we just have to support them banning Russia because, Kamala Harris, maybe she did some bad things, but Donald Trump is just so scary. And they get you into this mindset. It's really an intense psychological manipulation. And I'm sure the CIA and the intelligence agencies, they workshopped this over and over again. They tried it on different people, and they pulled from here and they pulled from there, and they mixed it up, and this is how these things work, right? And this is where woke came from. But the main thing, the reason that what we're doing with the Center for Political Innovation, we're not woke, is I don't want you to see yourself as a victim. I don't. I want you to see yourself as a creative, successful, powerful person. I want you to be confident and proud of who you are. I don't want you to be defined by your trauma. I don't want you to see yourself as a victim, and I don't want you to be scared of your fellow human beings. I want you to be proud of who you are. I want you to be creative. I want you to meet other people and have great connections with you. I want you to be successful. So I must be a fascist, right? Clearly, I must be a fascist, right? But no, CPI, we're trying to build people up. Right? We want people to establish real connections, to be proud of who they are, to be confident in their life. We don't want people to define themselves by their identity, by their oppression, by their trauma. We don't want to reduce people to childlike states. We don't want, we're not doing any of these evil things that the CIA and the intelligence agencies do. We're actually doing the opposite. If CPI is going to succeed as an organization, I need you to be able to go out and tell people about CPI. I need you to be very successful in your life. I need you to, be very successful in your life. I need you to make good friends that you can trust. I need you to be better. That's what I'm trying to do. The synthetic left, again, it's kind of like what I talked about with Kamala Harris. The synthetic left wants to reduce you to being an obedient cog and a bitter, resentful, angry, scared person. I want you to be a confident person, a successful person, a creative person, an optimistic person. I want the opposite for you of what the synthetic left wants, right? We are cultivating you. Go read the growth booklet. Do you believe in growth, right? It's on our website, right? It's on our website in the library section. Go and read the growth booklet where we talk about what woke is and the woke mindset. All right, go and read it. I want you to be successful. I want you to start your own business. In fact, if you started your own business as a CPI member and made a lot of money running your own business, that would be great for CPI. Oh my God, Caleb, that's not communist. We don't want business. That's capitalism. No. A big part of 21st century socialism is micro entrepreneurship, right? In the market sector. I would love it if you went out and started your own business, right? And if you became a small business owner and had a very successful small business while pushing CPI, I would love that. And using CPI's ideas and using your business to bring people into CPI, I would love that, right? I want you to be successful. The whole point of CPI is to help you become more creative, help you become more confident, help you become more successful while you understand the ideology that we're developing. Anti-imperialism, innovationism. So there you go. Anyway, Carter, you really know how to get me talking. Keep those good questions up. Thank you. Any good books about Eugene Debs? Well, first book I'll recommend would be our new textbook because it has a very important speech by Eugene Debs in it, his anti-war speech. But on top of that, I would say the best stuff I've ever read about Debs has been Debs' own words. I think Pathfinder Press, which is the Trotskyite publishing house, they published a book called Eugene Debs Speaks, and it was just the transcript of Eugene Debs' speeches. And Eugene Debs' speeches are very, very powerful because he was a populist orator. He was an optimist, and there's actually like passages from Eugene Debs that are very self-help oriented, where he's, telling people about, if you want to respect people, if you want respect from others, you got to respect yourself. A socialist can look himself in the mirror and see a man. There's an element of like self-help and empowerment if you go and read Eugene Debs' speeches. Another book that I would recommend, if you want to learn about Eugene Debs, read The Science of Being Great by Wallace Wattles. Wallace Wattles, the father of modern self-help, the father of New Thought, socialist New Thought, was also a socialist and an admirer and a good friend, a good personal friend of Eugene Debs. And you can listen to the audiobook. It's all over the internet. You can listen to the audiobook, The Science of Being Great. And there's a whole bunch in that book about Eugene Debs. He uses Eugene Debs as kind of the ideal model of a great person. And in the book, he talks about Eugene Debs as like the ideal of a great person. And he points to character attributes of Eugene Debs, The Science of Being Great. Here's an audiobook of Wallace Wattles, The Science of Being Great. And this is a personal friend of Eugene Debs. So there you go. All right. What about Epstein's Island? Okay, so the source, the person who has done like the huge amount of research on Epstein is Whitney Webb. And her feeling is that Epstein's Island was Israeli intelligence, that it was about getting compromise on people, that Epstein was an Israeli agent. And that what Epstein was doing was that, it was about, they would, take these politicians to go do the disgusting things they did, and they'd video record it, and then they'd have that on them. It was about getting compromising material on a politician in order to get them to do the will of Israel. That is what she believes that Epstein's Island was. I think it's very clear he didn't kill himself. There's no way he could have killed himself. I mean, in the cell he was in, and all. And then the video just conveniently goes out, and there's no way Epstein killed himself. Was it an Israeli operation? That is Whitney Webb's contention, and she makes the strongest case. What else was he doing? I don't see what else it could have been. Was he just a self-interested person who set this up for his own ends? He was very, very pro-Israel. He was, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. At the end of the day, I really don't know exactly what was going on, but Whitney Webb makes a very strong case that it was Mossad. It was an Israeli operation to get compromising information on government officials. And until I hear a more convincing explanation of what Epstein was doing, that's what I'm sticking with. One thing that I will point out is that many people have pointed out that QAnon is a giant distraction because Epstein's Island is not, it's all there. You go and read about it. Underage girls, politicians fly into an island. You don't need some crazy QAnon story. It's all right there. Right? I mean, and that's a fair critique of the QAnon world, right? They're writing this elaborate story about the pedophile mafia on this island and all that. And it's just like, why don't you just talk about Epstein? Right? I mean, it's all there. That's the crazy thing is a lot of times, the conspiracy universe, it's like all the facts are right there. They're all right there. And you don't need elaborate, Illuminati stuff. You don't need that. It's all right there. I mean, all the Epstein stuff is there. You go look at it. It's like, this is QAnon, but it's real. It's declassified and it's all right in front of our face. I was talking to somebody on the phone today, shout out to that person. And I referenced the book about Charles Manson that came out. It's called Chaos. Charles Manson, the CIA and the History of the 60s. Chaos, Charles Manson. Yeah, Chaos. Charles Manson, the CIA and the Secret History of the 60s by Dan Piepenbring and Tom O'Neill. And you read that book, that book makes a very strong case. It's not that the CIA, did the Charles Manson killings. That's not the case. They didn't do the Charles Manson killings. But Charles Manson was somebody who, when he was in prison, they did LSD experiments on him. And he was in Hollywood, Hollywood is a nest of intelligence because that's movies. Movies have a huge impact on crafting public opinion and all of that. And Hollywood was a nest of intelligence. So he was known to the intelligence community in Hollywood because he was living on a Hollywood set. And he was, his little, LSD drug cult was in Hollywood. And he killed Sharon Tate. And then afterwards, the intelligence agencies spun the story to their own ends. And if you read the details that are in this book, it's like, it's shocking, but it's not shocking, right? You read it, it's like Charles Manson was a guy in federal prison who they did drug experiments on. And they, then he found his way to Hollywood after he got out of prison, and he was continuing to do he was working with drug-related intelligence community, drug-related people. And he murdered somebody. And then the intelligence community, who knew who he was, crafted a whole narrative about his killings to serve political purposes. And you read it in the book, and it's like, okay, they're not saying he was, secretly part of the Illuminati and it was all a big thing. No, they're just saying, look, you read this book, you get a sense of how the so-called deep state operates. They find people, and they kind of figure out what they're doing. And then they have certain narratives they're trying to push related to certain countries or related to changing the culture in some way. And so then events happen and they respond to events, and they craft the response to events, or they cultivate people to act in certain ways. And a lot of it, it's not like they're the grand masters. They control everything. They don't control everything, but things happen. And they react to them when they happen, and they control the response in the media. They control the reaction. And they also help certain people get into certain positions when they know they can control their behavior, because they know it'll help them know what will happen, right? Look to read this book. I really do recommend it. This isn't a crackpot book. This was a best-selling book from a major publisher, and you read the details of it. You'll learn about how Project MKUltra worked. And you'll learn about, how the CIA, agents in Hollywood who inserted themselves into prominent circles and knew all the celebrities, how they operated. And you look into it and you're just like, oh, okay. There was a crazy guy who was in federal prison, and they did drug experiments on him. And, then after that, they helped him find his way to then he did some bad things in Hollywood, and then they crafted the narrative about it. And you look into it, and it's like, oh, okay, and it shows you, especially before before the internet and the widespread information, there were very few TV networks, and they could craft things in a certain way. The Democrats have started attacking Jill Stein for defending the Uhuru movement. They're entering dangerous territory there. Is that for real? Like, who's doing that? Is it just people on Twitter, or is it, because in a way that's good, because it means the Uhuru case is getting more attention. But I feel like the Democrats are playing with fire if they do that, because they don't want the case to get attention. They really don't want the case to get attention. And, yeah, I'm curious, John, if you know the extent that this is happening. I would like to see that, because, this is interesting. We shall see. I didn't see Beetlejuice. However, I go to Manhattan frequently for different things, and Times Square is all Beetlejuice, right? And what is Beetlejuice anyway? Like, what is it? It's like some kind of goth. I don't even know what it is. I know who the guy is, the character, right? He's the kind of gross looking guy, but what is it? Like, what is the premise of it? I almost don't want to know. It's like, I look at Beetlejuice and I just kind of like, blah, it just looks gross to me. I apologize if you're a big fan or whatever. I just look at it, and it doesn't appeal to me. Whatever it is, it's some kind of Halloween thing, right? He's like a monster, or he's a zombie or something, and I don't know. I just look at it and I'm just like, yeah, I don't want to see this. That's just what it looks like to me. I see it and I'm just like, I don't want to see this. Right? It looks too gross to me. I don't like things with bugs in them. I don't like things with feces in them. Maybe this is why I'm a fascist, I guess, right? I'm joking, but in the Bread Tube book, I talked about this. Left pessimism. I don't like feces. I don't like slime. I don't like dead. I don't like bugs. I don't like corpses. I don't like worms. I don't like this stuff. I just don't. I don't. And maybe I'm missing something, but I thought you weren't supposed to. Right? I thought you weren't supposed to like these things. I look at communist countries, and they build beautiful cities that are very clean. The Moscow subways, built in the time of Stalin, are amazingly beautiful and all that. And I just feel like, I'm not the cleanest person. I'll be honest. I struggle to be tidy, and, I leave my clothes on the floor, and my wife gets upset with me about it. And I try to do better about that. So maybe I don't practice what I preach, but I tend to like clean, and so there's something about the postmodern left, the Congress for Cultural Freedom. Not only do they promote Jackson Pollock and the art that's like splashing paint on a canvas, they also promote art that's like, a sculpture that's a piece of poop, and I don't get it. I don't get it. Why are they doing that? I feel like art should make you better. Art should make you better in some way. Art should make you like yourself more. It's not gross. It's boring. Beetlejuice. Okay. I don't even know what it's about. Like, what is it about? I don't even know what it's about, but whenever I see the face of that Beetlejuice character, and I see the billboards in Times Square for the movie, and I just go gross. Everything in me goes, that's gross. And I just look away. So, and it's weird because, again, I'm not the tidiest person, right? I'm very much in my thoughts, and I'm trying to be better. I try to make my bed every day, and, put my clothes in the hamper, and, I try to be tidier than is my nature and is my tendency, right? I tend to be, I leave books everywhere and all of that, but part of me just feels like, I should not, that anything that looks gross, I just want to stay away from. But I mean, have you ever watched Louis C.K.? I have. People say I look like him. I don't think I look like him. I have red hair. He has red hair. He has a goatee. I have a goatee. But his face is very different than mine. He's bald. I mean, I'll probably be bald eventually, but I don't know. A lot of people say I'm like him. I listen to Louis C.K. Some of his stuff is really, really funny. Some of it is really, really, really funny. Yeah, if I gained 100 pounds and I was balding, I would look like him. But I've had a lot of people say, "Oh, you look just like Louis C.K." I'm like, no, I don't. I have the same color as hair as him. I'm an but Louis C.K. I've listened to a number of his routines. I find him to be very, very funny. Some of his stuff is pretty good. It's pretty funny. Not all of it. I mean, some of it is, but some of it is just funny. I mean, it is. The other thing is the cancel case against Louis C.K. Again, he did something he shouldn't have done, but it's not the details of the case. If you actually look into it, it was all consensual. And they left that out of what everybody knows. And that's totally not fair to the guy. Everything he did was consensual. Now, he still shouldn't have done it, but it conveniently got left out of everything that, okay. Sounds like he's an exhibitionist, right? I mean, that's a sexual perversion, a deviation, right? He's an exhibitionist. I'm sorry. He probably had traumatic experiences in his upbringing. I mean, they say that if you're an exhibitionist, right? I mean, that I don't know, but that exhibitionists, they have the traumatic experience of like when they were an infant, like their mother was horrified by them, right? Because babies can be gross. They poop and they make messes and all of that. And they had the experience of like their mother looking on them in horror, right? They pooped on the wall or they, whatever. And, so their mother looked on them in horror and they were kind of traumatized by that as a child because your mother is your primary caretaker when you're a child. So their mother like looked on them in horror. And so their sexuality is like tainted to the point that they kind of get off on people looking on them in horror, right? And it's an awful thing, right? And that's like, flashers and awful people, I mean, people who commit like sex crimes, right? Some of them have this deviation and there's no excuse for that. They should go to jail for that. I mean, if you're flashing somebody, that's sexual assault. But in Louis C.K.'s case, what he's accused of doing is that, there were women he worked with and he would say, "Hey, can I do this?" They would say yes, and then he would do it. Well, I mean, that's still wrong, but it's not what they said he did. If you read the cancel culture articles in the New York Times and all of that, they all made it sound like he was a flasher. They all made it sound like he was a flasher. He was not a flasher, right? He said, "Can I do this?" And that was that. I mean, now he still shouldn't have done it, and he was, I mean, he's a comedian. And he was quote unquote at work when he did it. So it was still wrong, right? Not endorsing what he did, but he's not a flasher, right? He's not a flasher. So, I mean, that must be said. I mean, so yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've talked about this on these streams before, and it's just like, and the fact that, I mean, I think he, and he did apologize for what he actually did, right? He did some wrong things. He should not have ever tried to do that at work, right? Sure, he can come on the stream anytime. I won't talk about this with him. I'll obviously show enough respect to not talk about this issue. I mean, he obviously should never have done what he did at work. But that said, he's not a monster, right? He's just, well, he made a mistake and he's got a problem. I mean, and the way the media handled that whole thing, the Me Too thing was very, very strange. It was very, very strange. And, many people have pointed out the Me Too movement started when Donald Trump became president and it ended when Biden became president. Because, the whole thing was very, very weird. And, it was all very, very, very weird. So I don't know. And I could say more about that, but nah, tonight is not the night. This stream has gone in a lot of wild directions, I will say. We talked about wokeism and Zionism and all kinds of stuff. There you go, a phrase I abuse. I use that phrase way too much. But hey, you know what the heck, folks? I'm glad you're all here. The ability to get on here and chat with you every night. We have great conversations together. What we do here on these live streams is amazing, I think. The dialectic between all of us and all of you is amazing. And let's keep it going. I'll be back on here probably very late tomorrow night because I'll be reacting to the debate. I'll probably schedule the stream for like 11:30, maybe 11. And we'll react to the debate tomorrow night. I don't know what's going on with my job. If I'll be, may have to fit in doing that stream with my job, so I may not start until we don't know what's going to happen. Everything's up in the air. But I'm going to react to the debate tomorrow night, so that'll be good. That drug answer from a few days ago was great. Which answer was that, Carter? Oh, the dare thing. Yeah. No, Carter, you're good. You're asking me historical questions about the history that I have lived. So there you go. All right. Well, I'm going to put on my closing remarks, and we'll be back. We're going to put on the closing music, and then we'll be back. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.